The Stars and Stripes show is brought to you by the U.S. Embassy.
It's Gabs FM, power to engage your world. And of course, welcome to the Stars and Stripes radio show, proudly brought to you by the U.S. Embassy in partnership with Gabs FM, hashtag America in Botswana. And of course, on Tuesday, the 11th of July, we hosted the U.S. Africa Business Summit out in Gaborone, Botswana, where we had over 1,000 delegates, and we hosted a roster of high-level U.S. government officials and leading U.S. investors that represented over $2 trillion in assets. The U.S. Africa Business Summit was hosted by the BW government and the Corporate Council on Africa, and it is an absolutely premier annual event focused on trade and investment between the United States and African countries. Samantha and I saw a delegation from Zimbabwe, Mozambique, Namibia, Zambia. I saw Malawi, Nigeria, and a number of different captains of industry and entrepreneurs from across the continent.
Definitely. And I think so the most exciting thing is we got to sit down and talk to, like I did say, various stakeholders. And, you know, this next person we sat down to talk to left me, I was speechless. I'm not even going to say that. I was very speechless.
Absolutely.
We got to sit down to talk to a lady called Joy Basu, who serves as the Deputy Assistant Secretary of State in the Bureau of African Affairs, overseeing economic and regional affairs. She's got a very, very extensive portfolio.
Absolutely.
And she also earned her JD and MBA from Stanford University with a certificate in public management and social innovation. We did ask her what her office portfolio is and what she does, because, you know, it sounds quite exciting when you hear things such as Bureau of African Affairs.
Yes.
It must be exciting.
Not only that, Samantha, once she's a young person, she's heading the continent. Her portfolio, as you rightfully said, speaks to all 52 countries on the continent, number one. She's a person of color. And she's a woman. So I think for me, I was blown away from the fact that, wow, such a huge portfolio being assigned to a young woman.
I was encouraged.
Yes, absolutely. I think that's the right word. And those are things that we can learn from, you know, the American culture and how we can do that within our nation, because young people have value and we can sit at the table of power. Let's catch up to Joy, and this was the conversation. Look out for it. It's Gabs FM, power to engage your world.
The Stars and Stripes show is brought to you by the U.S. Embassy.
It's Gabs FM, power to engage your world. And of course, welcome to a special edition of the Midday Fix. Of course, we will be covering, or have been covering, the U.S. Africa Business Summit. And of course, it is a pleasure to have Joy Basu, who serves as the Deputy Assistant Secretary of State in the Bureau of African Affairs. She happens to oversee economics and regional affairs, as well as her portfolio includes commercial diplomacy, trade, democracy, human rights, and multilateral matters. It was a mouthful. Welcome to the show, Joy. How are you?
I'm well. It is a mouthful. So thank you for getting through that.
Is it your first time in country?
It is my first time, and I sincerely hope it will not be my last.
Oh, lovely.
Definitely. Let's get straight into it, Joy. Your role as Deputy Assistant Secretary of State in the Bureau of African Affairs, what exactly does that mean? What do you do?
It's a mouthful. I would say what I do every day is oversee a wonderful team of U.S. diplomats, and our job is to reinforce and build the U.S. Africa partnership. So as you read, you know, a big part of that is economics, but it is also all other diplomatic and political affairs, whether that is when it comes to energy security and access to energy, when it comes to food security and agriculture, when it comes to the AU and the UN in Africa. So I have the privilege of overseeing a wonderful team of dedicated public servants, and I just try to do justice by them every day. I try to do justice to this relationship and hope to, when I leave this role, that the people of the continent of Africa, the people of the United States of America will be better, stronger, more prosperous for it.
Wow, that's fantastic. Look, with the backdrop of the U.S. Africa Business Summit and your vantage point, what do you see and hope for Botswana and the continent of Africa moving forward?
You know, I really believe that Botswana's greatest resource is its people.
Absolutely.
And, sometimes we can be misled to think that its greatest resource is its diamonds or some other stone. No, we need to use those resources to benefit the people of Botswana and make sure that they can realize all their full talents. And so my hope coming out of this summit is that there will be increased investment, that there will be increased partnership so that we can see the economy build from that strong foundation which Botswana has, to diversify, to build into different sectors that bring in ideas, that bring in money, that allow the people of Botswana to develop their skills, to develop their ideas, to become entrepreneurs, to become leaders, to become government officials and civil society leaders, and help not only solve the problems of their communities here in Botswana, but across Africa and for the world. The world needs the people of Botswana to be at their top game. Absolutely. And to do that, we need to invest in their health, their food, their energy, their education, so that they can do that.
Definitely. Look, America and Botswana have had a long-standing relationship, which has been good, as well as the USA with other African states. I'm curious to find out some of the initiatives that are under your portfolio, the programs that you have implemented in order to promote trade and investment between the USA and the African states, or even Botswana, if I might add.
Yes, so I would call attention to a few. One that comes top of mind is one that President Biden announced in December, called the Digital Partnership with Africa, DTA. And DTA is designed to really help African countries build their digital ecosystem and build digital literacy, closing the digital divide, so that, again, the people of Botswana can achieve their potential in every sector of which digital will touch. So there's 3 pillars to DTA. One of them is building hard infrastructure. So that is, connectivity, cables, all of that. Part of that is soft infrastructure, which is really building the human capabilities and the human talent of the people of Botswana. And a part of it, which falls under my purview, is the policy enabling environment that allows different tech companies to invest, because we want to build an internet that is not only free and accessible, but that reinforces democracy. And Botswana has such a rich history of democracy. Absolutely. But we need to make sure the internet of the future is built with those same principles.
Absolutely. And what would you say to young people? Absolutely, the future's bright for the African young person, And what would you say to them? I mean, you're a young person, you're a woman, you've achieved so much in your personal role. What would you say to the young population of Botswana and Africa as we're about to close?
Yes, I have 2 thoughts there. One is that, I left my work in the business sector because I know that I get to live this life because I'm an American. Wow. And most people who are born who look like me, who are young women of color, do not get to live the life that I have lived.
Facts.
And I realize that is both a privilege and a responsibility, that the opportunity to captain one's fate should not be a factor of your passport. And I feel a strong responsibility of making sure that more young girls and boys can live their lives to their fullest potential and captain their fates. And so that is why I joined the U.S. government, and it is an incredible opportunity to serve. Second, to your direct question, my message would be to young Africans that you are the ones that we have been waiting for, right? Do not take any other story to heart, that you will be the leaders of your communities and your countries. Do not give up faith. We know the incredible potential that you have, and go do it. Go seize your dreams. One thing I often say about the United States and Africa is that we are places that are striving to become our best selves. Yeah. If you look at the AU founding documents, if you look at the founding documents of various African countries, if you look at the Declaration of Independence and our Constitution, we are still trying to become a more perfect union. And there's something I find so connecting and inspiring between Africa and America, is that we are young countries with young populations that are striving to be the countries we know we can. And I will turn to the young people of Africa to to shape their countries to be what they know they can be, what they have to be, not only for them and their communities, but for our world. So you are our hope, young Africans, and I am here to partner with you and empower you, and I cannot wait to see what you do with all your talents.
Wow, it's a wrap. There's nothing more we could say. Shout out to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And thank you so much for doing it on behalf of so many, whether it's American citizens, whether it's Africans. We appreciate you, and that means we are grateful and thank you.
I am very grateful. Thank you.
The Stars and Stripes show is brought to you by the U.S. Embassy.
It's Gabs FM, power to engage your world, and that was Joy Basu, who serves as the Deputy Assistant Secretary of State in the Bureau of African Affairs, overseeing economics and regional affairs. Her portfolio includes commercial diplomacy, trade, democracy, human rights, and multilateral matters. Immediately prior to this particular appointment, Ms. Basu served as the United States Department of Justice as Senior Counsel to the Deputy Attorney General. Before joining the Biden administration, Ms. Basu worked in the business at the nexus of investment, innovation, and development as the Chief of Staff at a global alternatives firm. Ms. Basu championed opportunities to facilitate entrepreneurship in emerging and frontier markets. She has built a groundbreaking multi-billion-dollar impact investment platform and has served as the global lead for food and agriculture. She's a decorated young person doing major things. And this is the level that the U.S. Africa Business Summit was at. We got to interact. And there's nothing better than face value conversations in terms of networking.
Look, I think another thing that we need to highlight about the things that were happening at the U.S. Africa Business Summit 2023, like you did say, Swift, we saw various leaders of state, including our very own president, His Excellency Re Mokgweetsi. Let me say Dr. Mokgweetsi K. Masisi, who was also there, and he actually did the opening remarks, which we were playing live on Gabs FM on Wednesday, if I'm not mistaken. We also had Honorable Scott Nathan, who we did sit down for a conversation with. We also had Dr. Jeffrey Staccio. And, the conversation all around enhancing Africa's value in global value chains, looking at different industries. My gosh, from tech to agriculture to the arts, to health,
manufacturing. So it was great. I mean, some of the sessions were enhancing Africa's value in global value chains, as you rightfully said, agricultural value chains, the value chains in digital and cyber services, and of course, manufacturing value chains, and a lot more. I even bumped into a gentleman who runs one of, I think it was the fourth largest children's chain store in the United States, in line with apparel. And he was saying out of his suppliers, if I'm not mistaken, I could be wrong, about 40% of his supply comes from Africa.
Wow.
And I was saying, how is that in line with China, and China, being a big player in manufacturing,
especially for
clothes.
And
he was saying the quality that comes from Africa as a continent is huge. So these are huge opportunities for us as the nation of Botswana and Africa. So one thing that I'd like to encourage Botswana, and one conversation that we had with Mr. Scott Nathan was around the small to medium enterprise. And it's always a beautiful, or a breath of fresh air, that these bilateral conversations are including the small to medium enterprise, the lifeblood of the economy. So that's one thing that, we're hoping that a lot of reports are going to come out of this particular event. We're going to see in terms of directions of where to find what Samantha and I call the economic bridge to financing. Well, 12:29 is your time. On the other side of this, we're going to continue conversation.
The Stars and Stripes show is brought to you by the U.S. Embassy.
Well, it's Gabs FM, power to engage your world. And of course, welcome back to the Stars and Stripes radio show, proudly brought to you by the U.S. Embassy in partnership with Gabs FM and of course, hashtag America in Botswana, as we continue the conversation where we are profiling the U.S. Africa Business Summit that was recently held from July the 11th, that was Tuesday this week, throughout till today, Friday the 14th of July 2023, as part of the White House's Prosper Africa initiative. We have had the honor as the Republic of Botswana to host a number of high-level U.S. government officials, leading captains of industry from around the continent, as well as the United States of America. And of course, the U.S. Africa Business Summit was hosted in partnership with the BW government, and the Corporate Council on Africa, otherwise known as CCA, is the premier annual event focused on trade and investment between the United States of America and African nations. And of course, it has proven to be a phenomenal premier top tier event. And of course, we had the honor of speaking, or rather I had the honor of speaking to Cynthia A. Griffin, who is the Minister Counsel for Commercial Affairs for Sub-Saharan Africa. Ms. Griffin assumed the position of Minister Counselor for the Commercial Affairs at the U.S. Consulate in Johannesburg in September of the year that is, or was, 2021. A member of the Senior Foreign Service, Ms. Griffin served as the Minister Counsel for Commercial Affairs at the embassy in Beijing from 2017 throughout till 2021, and prior to that as the U.S. Consul General in Perth with responsibilities for Western Australia 2013 throughout till 2016. Ms. Griffin also served as the Regional Director, Western Hemisphere for the U.S. Commercial Service in Washington, D.C., and where she oversaw the operations of 14 offices throughout North America, Central America, and South, as served as the Commercial Counselor in Bangkok, Thailand. And of course, she has or is in charge of the portfolio that is the continent of Africa. And I had the honor of interviewing her, and this was the conversation that we had between the two of us. This is what she had to say. Good afternoon. Scabs FM, power to engage your world, and of course, welcome to another version of what is happening out in Tlokweni. We are officially at the U.S. Africa Business Summit, which is being held or hosted by the Corporate Council on Africa in partnership with the BW government. And of course, it's been an amazing day. And of course, this is going to open up many avenues for so many Botswana in the long term. And of course, I have the honor of speaking to Cynthia Griffin, Minister Counsel for Commercial Affairs for Sub-Saharan Africa. Cynthia, how are you?
Good, Swift. How are you? I'm glad to be here with you.
Fantastic. Look, you hold a huge portfolio. I mean, Sub-Saharan Africa is a huge portfolio. Just walk us through your mandate and what you do in line with Africa.
So our mandate is to promote two-way trade.
Wow.
You know, we need to get more U.S. companies here on the continent.
Absolutely.
And get more African companies doing business in the United States.
Absolutely.
With the United States. We have a huge diaspora community that's really keen to engage with the continent. We have an administration in the Biden-Harris administration that is just doing so much more with Africa on the continent. I'm just delighted to be in this role.
Fantastic. Look, allow me to engage you from the context of Botswana. You know, a lot of companies are looking for that bridge. They struggle in terms of understanding where to find that bridge. Whether we like it or not, the World Wide Web is a huge global village. If you were to speak to a startup, if you were to speak to a business in Botswana, where would they start in terms of engaging, this economic bridge that will result in two-way trade?
Well, first of all, we want to make sure it's a business.
Yeah.
We can't work with aspirational ideas.
Yes,
we have to work with companies that are already established, that are already doing business. And then I would urge them to be in touch with the U.S. Embassy. I'm just one of multiple agencies that's here. We have Prosper Africa that's here.
Absolutely.
We have U.S. Trade and Development Agency, U.S. Development Finance Corporation. We have our State Department colleagues, and so we're all here to help. And so I would start first with coming to the embassy, and I would also look at going to the American Business Council.
Absolutely.
Because they're the groups that, put companies together as well. And once you come into our pipeline through Prosper Africa, you talked about the World Wide Web,
yeah.
But Prosper Africa's website is meant to help facilitate accessing us so that you don't have to figure out, do I go to Commerce? Do I go to Export-Import Banks? Do I go to U.S. Trade and Development Agency? Do I go to the Department of Agriculture? Who do I go to? Our Prosper teams can help you identify who you need to go to and assist.
Absolutely.
So,
let's talk success stories. I mean, sub-Saharan Africa is such a huge geographical location. Could you share some of the success stories that you've been part and parcel through your office?
Sure. On the African side, I'm just thinking of a woman-owned cybersecurity tech company.
Wow.
South African. Black woman, South African.
Nice.
Went to our Select USA conference in Washington, D.C.
Nice.
Which is about investing in the United States or setting up your business in the United States.
Okay.
Because they're incubator units. She went to the Select USA Summit, met with Prince George's County, Maryland folks. They have an incubator program. She's now there in the United States with her company in the incubator program.
Wow.
To me, that's a success.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And whether we like it or not, if I'm not mistaken, this statistic could be wrong, but I know it's right. Africa holds the most women entrepreneurs in the world. So definitely Africa is the future. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak to me. Is there anything that you'd like to share? How has been the last 2 days in line with the U.S. Africa Business Summit?
We need more of these summits. We need to see more summits on the continent.
I like that.
I was also at a summit in Kenya, East Africa Regional Summit, where we had hundreds of U.S. companies. Company representatives need to come to the continent, see for themselves what the opportunities are. Of course, we as a government are here to assist them. But Africa's a future.
Absolutely.
And U.S. companies need to be here.
Absolutely. Well, that's how we focus on shared prosperity. Shout out to the U.S. government and the BW government. I have had the honor of speaking to Cynthia Griffin, Minister Counselor for Commercial Affairs for Sub-Saharan Africa. She assumed the position of Minister Counselor for Commercial Affairs at the U.S. Consulate in Johannesburg in September of 2021. She's also a member of the Senior Foreign Service. Ms. Griffin served as the Minister Counselor for Commercial Affairs at the Embassy in Beijing from 2017 until 2021, and prior to that as the U.S. Consul General in Perth with responsibilities for the Western Australia. And of course, thank you so much, Ms. Griffin. And you know, before you leave, you've got to have what is called siswa, okay? It's pounded beef. Have you had it?
I haven't, but my colleagues have been talking about it throughout this trip. So yes, I'll have it.
Fantastic. Have a great day. Thank you so
Swift.
much.
You knew the midday fix.
It's Gabs FM, power to engage your world. She is a talent. She is a diamond of the creative sector. And of course, BW. She goes by the name Mposi Bina. This one is titled Chuele. She actually was part and parcel of a session that Samantha and I had the honor of being part and parcel. I believe it was called Financing the African Creative Industry, where she was speaking on behalf of musicians. And, you know, she was speaking about the importance of having different income streams, as well as building an ecosystem that promotes better artistry.
Definitely. I think also on that panel, very interesting people on there. We had Linus Ida Horse. I think that's the one who really caught your attention.
Yes, absolutely. I think he was one of the people that pioneered the Nigerian film sector. Yeah. He was amazing. You know, he did produce, and we had the CEO of SIDA as well, speaking about the stance as a financial institution. He was wearing the hat of the BW government and how they are. And you know what? One thing that I've got to respect about that particular and his line of, you know, conversations was he actually admitted that as a government we are not there yet, but we are striving to get there in terms of understanding, you know, whether we like it or not. This is what he said, and I somewhat agree with him to a certain extent. He was like, you know, financing Samantha Mowa's album is unpredictable.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
High risk. Because you don't know if it's going to be successful or not.
So he was saying, as much as we do hear the voice of the creative that's saying we're struggling with financing, we're also saying, well, how can we find a balanced approach in terms of financing you and obviously managing our risk and, of course, ensuring that we get return on investment?
That's the whole point of business in any sector.
Absolutely tricky. But moving swiftly along, as we rightfully said, you're on the Stars and Stripes radio show, proudly brought to you by the U.S. Embassy in partnership with Gabs FM. And of course, we have another interview that we had the honor of conducting with Mr. Scott Nathan, who is the CEO of the U.S. Development Finance Corporation, the newest CEO of the U.S. International Development Finance Corporation. Scott Nathan was appointed by the President Biden and confirmed by the Senate in February 2022 and brings an extensive experience across the private and public sectors to the role. He worked in investment business for 20 years and worked for Secretary Kerry at the State Department in the Obama administration. And one thing that he is one of the leading coordinators of, if I'm not mistaken, a budget of $55 billion that the Biden administration has committed towards Africa. One thing that stood out for me was when he said, at the end of the day, it is great to meet, but what is the action item after the meeting? So this was a conversation between Samantha and I and Mr. Scott Nathan. Good afternoon. Gabs FM, powered to engage your world. And of course, welcome to the Stars and Stripes radio show, proudly brought to you by the U.S. Embassy in partnership with Gabs FM. And of course, this one is a special edition of the Stars and Stripes radio show because we're on the road and we're out at the U.S. Africa Business Summit, which began on the 11th of July throughout till the 14th of July. Now, as part of the White House's Prosper Africa initiative, we are hosting, or the U.S. government is hosting, a high-level U.S. government officials and leading U.S. investors that represent over $2 trillion in assets. The U.S. Africa Business Summit, hosted by the Corporate Council on Africa, otherwise known as CCA, is the premier annual event focused on trade and, of course, investment between the United States and African countries. This year, the delegation is drawing attention to the 6-month milestone after the conclusion of the U.S. Africa Leaders Summit in December 2020 and how the United States is delivering on the high-profile U.S. government and private sector commitments. And of course, leading the delegation will be Mr. Scott Nathan, who is the CEO of the U.S. International Development Finance Corporation, otherwise known as DFC. Samantha?
A brief background. Mr. Scott Nathan serves as the CEO of the U.S. International Development Finance Corporation, DFC, and he was appointed by the President, confirmed by the Senate on February the 9th, 2022, and formally sworn in by the Vice President. Mr. Nathan has had extensive experience across both the public sector as well as the private sector. Most recently, he served as the senior advisor to the White House Office of Presidential Personnel after having worked on the Biden-Harris presidential transitions appointments team, where he oversaw appointments for the Office of Management and Budget, the Office of Personnel Management, and the General Services Administration. Welcome to, first of all, Botswana, Mr. Nathan.
Thank you very much.
It's so good to have you on the show, and we're quite excited about this conversation that we're about to have.
Thank you, Samantha. Thank you, Swift. It's great to be here. Great to be in Botswana for the summit.
Fantastic. You must try siswa, okay? Siswa is a delicacy of food, okay?
Okay, I look forward to that.
That's my recommendation, okay?
Great, fantastic.
Sam,
fantastic.
Let's get into it. What does the United States see as the value of events such as the CCA Summit here in Gaborone or the U.S. Africa Leaders Summit that was hosted in Washington last December? What value is there in having events such as these?
Well, the value is on multiple levels. It's important to be convening leaders, convening business, governmental leaders, civil society leaders together to work on the partnership between the United States and the nations of Africa. Mm-hmm. So from a symbolic point of view, from a convening point of view, from trying to have concrete deliverables and follow-up, these events, whether the Africa Leader Summit, this business summit that we're here for today, is really important for making the connections, making the introductions that create business leads that lead ultimately to deals and to the relationships which make a difference in the partnership between the United States and Africa.
Definitely.
Absolutely. I mean, this particular summit is of great interest to a lot of Africa and Botswana from the viewpoint of business and entrepreneurship. I mean, Africa obviously recently signed the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement, but do you think it provides a strong platform for African businesses to actually grow, including the small business? I know the American people are all about the small businesses, and small businesses serve as the backbone of the economy.
Swift, you're exactly right. Small business is the engine of growth.
Absolutely.
In most economies, it's true in the United States, it's true around the world, and of course true here in Botswana and generally in Africa. Access to capital is the lifeblood of small business. Making sure that entrepreneurs, business leaders, people who are employing the people in their countries, they need capital in order to invest in capital expenditures, to invest in their businesses, employ more people, sell goods, provide services, and grow.
It's interesting that you say that. Samantha and I read a study about Botswana National Productivity Center, and it hammered that same point.
Absolutely.
Access to capital is such a vital component in order to ensure a success rate. And one thing Samantha and I also admire about the United States is also the fact that, ideation is such a high priority in U.S. culture, Samantha. And the fact that I think the first patent in the United States was in the 1800s. So it goes to show the power of, ideation and financing ideation. Let's move along, Sam.
Now, in the beginning, when we were introducing you, we did say that you are the CEO of the U.S. International Development Finance Corporation, otherwise known as DFC. Can you tell us about the DFC and how it works, where it works, what exactly do you do?
Well, thank you for the opportunity to talk about our organization. So the Development Finance Corporation is the development finance institution of the United States, a development bank, essentially. And we're focused on countries around the world that need capital to grow. These are developing countries. We build on the legacy of some previous agencies in the U.S. government that have a long history of being involved in Africa and in Botswana. The Overseas Private Investment Corporation is our primary predecessor agency. They pursued $170 million of projects here in Botswana that we currently manage at DFC. The Development Finance Corporation is about mobilizing capital to the private sector. We focus on the private sector, not providing capital to the state level. We're looking to have private business as the sustainable engine of growth in developing economies. Aid is important. Support at multiple levels is important, but for the long-term sustainability, economies have to grow with access to private capital, and that's what we're all about. We do that through loans, through equity investments, through providing political risk insurance or technical assistance grants. These are our different tools, but it's all focused on finding great opportunities in the private sector, helping them grow, and providing the capital to do so.
Well, it's Gabs FM, Power to Engage Your World. And of course, if you've just joined us, welcome to the show. And of course, you are on the Stars and Stripes radio show, proudly brought to you by the U.S. Embassy in partnership with Gabs FM. Of course, let's continue the conversation. Let's touch on, can you provide more information on, the different sectors in which the United States is making investment? We do know that whether we like it or not, we're part and parcel of the digital currency, the digital world. I mean, we are able to interact with, Americans on the other side of the world while being in Botswana. I do know that we've come out of COVID-19 and, even in the education space, the digital element was such an important component in terms of classroom learning and remote learning. What are some of the success stories or the sectors that the U.S. government is looking to invest in?
Well, you're right about digital. We're focused on infrastructure, And digital is the 21st century
Absolutely.
Infrastructure, critical for growth, critical for business to operate, as you mentioned, education, government, and otherwise. I mean, it's hard to imagine what it was like before we all had cell phones, before we all had access to the internet. And this is the basis for so many different elements of society, and especially business. But we're focused across many sectors in private business. So as I mentioned, infrastructure, that's not just digital, that's of course the traditional hard infrastructure, roads, airports, ports, bridges. Of course, we also want to make sure that what's necessary for the growth of an economy and for just daily life is well funded. So that's food security and agribusiness, resilient healthcare systems, financial inclusion, making sure that no one is left behind as economies grow. And as we talked about before, support for small business is so important.
Definitely. Now, Mr. Nathan, you guys are here during our winter months, and Botswana gets very, very hot, especially from November, December, January. We have a lot of sunlight throughout the year, and I'd just like to find out how the DFC supports Botswana into turning sun energy into wealth, especially since we see our neighboring country, South Africa, really struggling with energy. They have a major energy crisis. How is your organization trying to support Botswana into turning energy into wealth?
Well, Samantha, like we were saying, access to capital is critical, is the lifeblood to growth in an economy. So is access to reliable, affordable energy. An economy can't grow without that, and that's a huge emphasis for DFC. I was reading Botswana is the #1 country in the world for access to the sun, for solar radiation.
Yep.
So that provides a huge opportunity to develop solar energy. Clean, plentiful. The ability to distribute it throughout the country. DFC, the rest of the U.S. government, and certainly President Biden are very focused on renewables. Solar, wind, geothermal, hydrogen. This is very important for addressing the climate crisis. This is a huge amount of focus on our legislation that's passed in the United States to help support this industry. But this is true in terms of our activities abroad, and especially for DFC. This is a core area of our activity around the world. Last year, we announced $2.4 billion of investments worldwide in the renewable energy sector, and we have ambitions to keep that growing. Here in Africa, we recently have closed several deals in the solar sector. In Malawi, we provided, or in the process of providing, $25 million for a solar on-grid plant that's coupled with storage. It's one of the first innovative investments that not only is generating electricity during the day, but because of the battery storage, is able to provide electricity from the sun at night. We would love to find investments like this in Botswana. We have the funding ready to go. It's all a question of finding the entrepreneurs or the companies that are interested in doing these developments and making sure that those developments make sense from a commercial point of view with the proper tariffs and connections to the grid. This is the way to the future, and DFC wants to be involved. The United States wants to be involved in providing that.
Well, absolutely. Talk about shared prosperity. And of course, thank you so much. We have been speaking to Mr. Scott Nathan. He is the new CEO of the U.S. International Development Finance Corporation, otherwise known as DFC. And Mr. Scott Nathan was appointed by President Biden and confirmed by the Senate in February of 2022.
The Stars and Stripes show was brought to you by the